All righty, folks. Good morning. Couple of things. I want you to think about this. I know you're starting to work on this, but I want to note something that I didn't put up here that I think is really, really important. And that is tonight, September 29th, 9 p.m. What's going on? Yes, we have a presidential debate. Next question is like, where can I watch it? I'm pretty much turn on your TV and just start flicking channels. It will be there. You all are, I don't know if it's blessed or cursed in that you have other options when these things are on. When I was a kid, it was on every channel. We had less channels. We had no anything to binge on. We could pull out the VHS tapes if we were really desperate, okay? Just flip the channels. It's on all the major networks, so it's on the Fox channel and ABC and NBC and CBS. It's on Fox News. It's on MSNBC. It's on CNN for sure. PBS. It is on. They said it's on from 9 to 10:30, which I was kind of like relieved to hear because some other like national things like the State of the Union start at 9 and then it's like holy cow, it's almost midnight before they're done. So. This is kind of a set amount of time. You all have a better chance of staying awake for it than I do because I usually go to bed at about 9 these days, okay? My dad used to do that. They'd go to bed at 9. I'm like, how does he do that? Now I understand. Life changes like that. So the debate tonight, some things to think about, some things to look for. They're going to probably ask and talk about their record. Both candidates will be asked questions. So the record for President Trump as president, for Vice President Biden as vice president, and more so as senator. They're going to talk about, how and why they support certain policies in a certain way. This is where you kind of become educated on what's going on with this election a bit. Debates is one way, okay? It's kind of an important piece of that process. So I urge you to tune in, check it out tonight if you can. If you don't have cable, it'll be live streamed on something, YouTube will have it live. It's worth checking out some of it. And even if you watch some of it, you're like, well, I go to bed at 10. Well, then watch for an hour. It's worth it as an AP government student. You get to see the process firsthand. So I urge you to check it out, okay? All right. So last week, you, for homework, should have read some of maybe Federalist 10 or Brutus 1, or at the very least, there were 3 videos in there that kind of walked you through it closely, okay? What do you remember about either of those? Yes. Yeah, so Federalist number 10 was trying to convince people when you look to ratify the Constitution. There we go. It was, and so as part of what we call it the Federalist Papers, a collection of essays. When you read them, and you have access to several of the Federalist Papers in your resources folder. Those are the foundational documents. You get do you need to know every word about them? No. We're going to read part of number 51 today. We're not going to read every word of it. But you need to kind of understand what it's about, okay? And on the AP test, what they do is they're going to do some of the writing is they might say to you, here's another document, and they'll tell you everything you need to know about it on the test that we didn't study, but then compare it to Federalist number 10 or something you do know, okay? So we have ones we have to know and ones then they'll give us. So Federalist number 10. Kind of the main message is support the Constitution, which is the kind of main idea of all of the Federalist Papers. Brutus, what do you got for Brutus? Man. Sometimes part of what's called the Anti-Federalist Papers. You're less familiar with these. What's kind of the main message of Brutus, number one? Say what? Stay with the Articles of Confederation, perhaps because the new Constitution they are proposing is too powerful, right? Stick with the Articles, we like it. And we looked at that idea between a confederation government and a unitary government. Their fear is we'll be too much like a unitary government. And they make arguments for kind of limiting that power. So what we're going to do today is we're going to spend our class time, because you guys are watching the videos and getting kind of a lot of the basics and more than the basics through those and through answering a few questions. Yes, I'm going to give you actual paper. I could do this on your Chromebook, but let's take a break. So if you're like, I don't want to touch that paper that Mr. Ferd has handed me, then I don't know what to tell you. Okay. We can pull it up in a Chromebook, I suppose. You're welcome. You are welcome. Such a, I already gave you one. What am I doing here? Okay. Oh, yeah, really, seriously. All right. So we're going to look at parts of Federalist number 51. Federalist number 10, I know in AP US History, we talked about it last year. You may have covered it in another US History class. But in Federalist number 10, if you remember, the main thing, Madison happened to have written this one. Remember, the Federalist Papers were written by Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. I forgot, I knew that Hamilton wrote a lot of them. The musical actually reminded me, because I finally got to see it on Disney Plus, that he wrote like most of them, okay? Madison was arguing that there's a problem about factions. People are worried that one faction might become too powerful. And he said, I want you to know in this Constitution, relax. So he's trying to explain this federation system, Federalist system a little bit, okay? We've got factions kind of covered. They're going to outvote each other. If the faction is a minority, they're going to always get outvoted. And then actually more factions means they're always kind of competing. We have what we call competing policy-making interests, okay? And we're going to talk this year about special interest groups and lobbying groups and political parties and so on, okay? But Madison is saying this is not going to, he's trying to explain how it's not going to be like a unitary government. So we're going to look at Federalist 51 a little bit, and we're just going to do a guided reading. I have chunks pulled out from Federalist 51. When you look at it, it always says, like, dear people of New York, because it was put into the New York papers. So it says, to the people of the state of New York. He signed as Publius, meaning people lover, lover of the public. But we now know this is Madison writing again, okay? And so we're going to examine that just for a little bit here today, because we really got to work on like how we read this stuff, how we analyze it, okay? So this simplifies some of it for us, okay? So here we go. To what expedient then shall we finally resort for maintaining in practice the necessary partition of power among several departments, as laid down in the Constitution? The only answer that can be given is that as all these exterior provisions are found to be inadequate, the defect must be supplied by so contriving the interior structure of the government as that its several constituent parts may be, by their mutual relations, be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. So he says something here about, we've created this Constitution with kind of a necessary partition of power among several departments. Take a second. Answer that question there on the right. What do you think he means by those necessary partitions? He says, we've created this with some partitions in place. What do you think he means by the necessary partitions? Checks and balances, he's getting to, in fact, how many partitions are we talking? 3. We're talking about checks and balances and our 3 branches. Okay? But why? Like, you and I have been taught since we were like pretty young that there's 3 branches of government, right? But we may not have asked why. It's kind of funny because there's a stage in life where you ask why all the time around age 2 or 3. Why? No, why? No, that's all the toddlers ever say, really? More, maybe. Okay? Or no, why? Okay. But when you got a little older, you learn about 3 branches. And maybe that's where we should have said why. Why 3 branches? What is the reason he gives? To keep them in their proper place. Okay? You know, it's right. It says it, and I know some of this is, you know, it's a lot of it's bolded. Be the means of keeping each other in their proper places. Okay? All right? He's saying that we have to keep kind of these roles, you know, in their proper places. Now, let's think about that. Okay? Think about the 3 main roles of those 3 branches a little bit. You know this stuff, right? Legislative branch makes the laws, the executive branch executes or carries out the laws, the judicial branch interprets the laws. Okay? If you make all the rules, but then you tell us what they really mean, that could be really a problem, right? You're like, no, I got this covered. No, yeah, I got this. Yeah, right, okay. The rest of us are like, I don't think so, okay? All right? But if you make the rules, but then he carries them out, do you see how we've limited our government a little bit? Remember the fears of the anti-federalists. Madison is trying to address a lot of these fears here, okay? So he goes on to say, in order to lay a due foundation for that separate and distinct exercise of the different powers of government, which to a certain extent is admitted on all hands to be essential to the preservation of liberty, it is evident that each department should have a will of its own, a will of its own. Okay? So he's saying those 3 branches should have a will of their own. Another way to think about this, let me ask you this. If we say you have a will of your own, and it's funny that I just mentioned toddlers, I wasn't meaning to go this way, but toddlers have a will of their own, yes? Who's done some babysitting here? Yeah. Okay, they have a will of their own. If that doesn't work for you, customers where you work have a will of their own. And they're always right. Yes, good answer, yes. At least when the Pereiras show up for takeout, right? Okay, so if I have a will of my own, what do we, there's a relationship amongst a group of people when everyone has a will of their own. I make my decision, do I make my decision dependent on what she's thinking and what he's thinking? We call that independent, right? Okay, so think of it that way. We're really asking, okay, that they be independent of each other. Okay? So he's explaining that they should be independent of each other. All right? And this is kind of key here. He goes on to say, and consequently should be so constituted that the members of each should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of the members of the others. Now, we have sort of an exception to that, perhaps. Okay? Does anybody know what we mean by that word agency? Say it again. It's your involvement in something. It's your like kind of degree of power. Okay? So if your parents make all the decisions for you, I know they make some decisions for you. They decide to pay the taxes on you. So, you know, just throwing that out there. They decide to pay for the heat and for the cable and for your phone. And okay, I'm just throwing that out, okay? But if they made every decision for you, you would have what we call very little agency. So you have to think about that. Well, they make some decisions for me, but they let me decide, you know, I can decide what I want to wear. They might comment on it. You wearing that? Going out wearing that? Okay? It's February. Why are you wearing shorts every day? Okay? Because I do. It's what I do. All right? You have agency. Okay? And he's saying they should have as little agency as possible in the appointment of members of the others. Now, we do have kind of an exception to that a little bit, don't we? What branch appoints members of the other branch? Executive appoints members of the judicial branch, and then the legislative branch decides whether or not that appointment is going to happen. So while there's some agency there, they don't give complete agency over that. Do you see how they put a limit in there? It still, I think, lives up to the language a bit, okay? Were this principle rigorously adhered to, it would require that all the appointments for the supreme, executive, legislative, and judiciary magistrates, I love these fancy words, you know what he means, the branches, should be drawn from the same fountain of authority, the people, through channels having no communication whatever with one another. Some deviations, or some, we're going to go in another direction, a deviation, you're deviating, you guys learned about this in math probably, deviating away, therefore, from the principle must be admitted. In the constitution of the Judiciary Department, in particular, it might be inexpedient to insist rigorously on the principle. First, because peculiar qualifications being essential. How do I get rid of that? No, it's not what we want to do. Whatever. Okay. All right. So he explains that exception of the judiciary, the judicial branch. Okay. He says it might be inexpedient to insist rigorously on the principle because peculiar qualifications, blah, 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 blah. And he says this, okay? Peculiar qualifications. If we just vote on Supreme Court justices, could you see the problem? Will we necessarily get people who are truly qualified? I don't have time to do all that research, even with today's technology, okay? So he explains kind of that exception here. All right. And he goes on to say, secondly, because the permanent tenure by which the appointments are held in that department must soon destroy all sense of dependence on the authority of conferring them. So because the judicial branch, the members of the Supreme Court have a permanent job, they have it for life. They're not necessarily dependent on that president forever. The president has limits, correct? So we have people in the Supreme Court that were appointed by at least Bill Clinton. Perhaps there might be one left. No, I think we're at least talking Clinton nominees onward. Okay, Bill Clinton's been out of office like, 20 years almost. Okay, all right. So we've kind of done that. 3 departments. Name them for me. They were here, but name them. Legislative, executive, judicial. Okay? All right? He's spelling that out. Remember, he's addressing the fears of those who are afraid of a unitary government, of a strong central government. So in Federalist number 10, he talked about, don't worry about some faction. Don't worry if you're a Democratic Republican and the Federalist Party is going to run things all the time. Or in today's language, don't worry if you're a Republican that the Democrats are going to run things all the time. We keep each other in check. Don't worry too much, or at least understand we have a system where if you are for more gun control and you're worried that the gun rights advocates are going to be in charge all the time. We keep each other in check through these processes. In this, he's talking specifically about the three branches. Okay? All right, number 3, part 3, and these are just different chunks. It is equally evident that the members of each department should be as little dependent as possible on those of others. Where the executive magistrate, who does he mean by the executive magistrate? He's talking about the president of the executive branch, right? Okay? Or the judges not independent of the legislature in this particular, their independence in every other would be merely nominal. Okay? So take a minute and just write down what he's suggesting as a relationship amongst the three. So what do you got? What do you got? Go. Mainly independent of each other. Sometimes it's that simple. Yes, that's an excellent answer. Mainly independent of each other, okay? As much as possible. There'll be exceptions. But he wanted to make that clear. Their fears that unitary government like they had under Britain, where kind of the king and parliament made shots, when parliament, even though parliament was a lawmaking body, kind of separate from the king, okay? The way the British government was set up, and they had no written constitution really, he could override whatever parliament came up with at really any time, okay? All right, a little tricky here because we got cut off in the pages, I apologize. But he says, but the great security against, well, it's by the way, it's not a bad thing to look at the question. It says, what does the phrase ambition must be made to counteract ambition mean? Okay, it's never a bad thing to look ahead. But the great security against a gradual concentration of the several powers in the same department consists in giving to those who administer each department the necessary constitutional means, way of doing things, and personal motives to resist encroachments on the other. So we need to give them the means, the ability to do things, but also we got to give them motives, incentives to resist encroaching on each other. The provision for defense must, in this, as in all other cases, be made commensurate to the danger of attack. Ambition must be made to counteract ambition, and we're going to think about what that means. What does that mean? What could that mean? Yes? Right, because they're all kind of going for that, all right? This is kind of an interesting thing here, that the framers of the Constitution like really tried to understand human nature, okay? Like they in some ways were really lofty, like we think people can have power, but we also understand people have ambitions, people can be selfish, they might even be greedy, okay? And so the fact that there's going to be members of each branch that are ambitious and want certain things keeps each other in check. Okay? Great answer. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections of human nature? We say something about who we are through the rules we make, don't we? Okay? We say something about who we are through the laws we make. Government is often a reflection of that. If you look through, when you study human history, we study laws. Did you guys in 9th or 10th grade study Hammurabi's Code? Yeah, ancient Babylonia, right? You learned a lot by studying their laws about who they were, okay? You learn a bit about their religion. You learn a bit about their geography, okay? Like, man, when they punish people, they throw them in the water. You learn that they believed in harsh punishments to keep people in check. Remember that? Hammurabi's Code, I used to teach that. It was like, you sneeze wrong, you die. I know that's not really in there, but it felt like it, like it's pretty harsh, okay? All right? And this is a very famous quote here. You're looking for a quote for your yearbook this year. I know you're thinking about it and, giving it a lot of thought, okay? Madison said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If we were perfect and considerate of each other all the time, we wouldn't need rules. Correct? But we're not. Are we? Okay? And so Madison is saying, he goes on to say, if angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. We wouldn't need all of this. He's saying, I get it. Okay? Anti-Federalists are fearful of an abusive government. Madison's like, I get it. We're not so perfect. Okay? In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. So he's about to tell us what it lies in. You must first enable the government to control the governed. They got to have power. That didn't work out so well under the Articles of Confederation, right? A government with very little power. And in the next place, oblige it to control itself. It's got to have power over the people, but it's also got to have power over itself. A dependence on the people is no doubt the primary control on the government, but experience has taught mankind the necessity of auxiliary precautions, of outside precautions, extra precautions. So what is Madison saying about human nature? We kind of got at this, but what is he saying? Right. We're not perfect, but we wouldn't need this kind of government. We wouldn't need any government. Okay? Imagine in the current state of things, if we're like, hey, here's the science about COVID. It would be really smart to stay 6 feet apart and wear a mask. We have to have rules about it. And I wouldn't have to do this to people once in a while when they go under the nose, that happens in class. Sometimes it just happens, and I wouldn't have to remind people. We wouldn't have to have rules about it. We wouldn't have to have a rule that we have to do like that little questionnaire every day, right? Because we could trust each other, that I'm sick, I'm staying home, or man, I'm just going to pretend I'm not sick today. Okay. Did you guys ever do that in the past? Like you had a cold or flu and you're like, it's more work to take the day off. Oh, I feel sad that you've learned that at that young age. For me, as an adult, like totally like I hate taking the day off. Okay. It's too much work. Okay. Well, now with all the Zoom stuff, I'm like, can you just have somebody come in, turn it on, and I'll just be like this big head up here on the screen and I'll just talk and we'll work together. It'll be different. Okay. I'll be like, okay guys, excuse me, I'm really sick, but we'll work through it. All right. So then he goes on to say, okay. So we're getting an idea here. Let's kind of backtrack a little bit. He's saying, relax, we've set up this government with 3 branches, and we've done that because we understand human nature. We understand that we have a lot of people that want power who are ambitious. Okay? And instead of pretending like, trust us, we're not ambitious, he's like, we are. So let's have a system that kind of fixes that. because he's ambitious and she's ambitious and he's ambitious and she's ambitious and we're all ambitious, and we're going to keep each other in check that way. He says the policy of supplying by opposite and rival interests the defect of better motives, and you're going to be paraphrasing this next section here in a second, might be traced through the whole system of human affairs, private as well as public. We see it particularly displayed in all the subordinate distributions of power, where the constant aim, this is the part we're looking at, where the constant aim is to divide and arrange the several offices in such a manner as that each may be a check on the other. That is the private interest of every individual, that every individual may be a sentinel over the public rights. So what is he saying? Let's see if we can paraphrase that real quick, whether you write it down or not. What does he mean? The constant aim is to divide and arrange the several offices in such manner as that each may be a check on the other. They balance each other out. And earlier when I asked what system he was proposing, you said it's a system of what? Checks and balances. We're going to set it up in a way that they're checking each other. So we're not just separating them and trying to keep them independent of each other. We're having them kind of be gatekeepers against each other. He says then, but it is not possible to give each department an equal power of self-defense. Okay? It's not always going to be completely, perhaps, seem equal. He's acknowledging these things the Anti-Federalists are worried about. Okay? And he said, so let's just face it, it's not always going to be that way. In Republican government, Republican lowercase r, what does that mean? The word Republican, remind me again. Not the Republican Party. What does it mean if we have a republic? Say what? Powers from the people. But do we vote on every single law there is? We have representatives. It is a representative form of government, okay? He says in Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. The remedy for this inconveniency is to divide the legislature in different branches. So which branch does he say probably is going to dominate? Legislative, right? Which we call what? Congress, right? You're all giving the right answers. I just terribly hard of hearing. Maybe since I got amplification, I should get some from there. Yeah, okay. My ears. All right. Now, okay, I'm going to jump down to the last question that says, how has the legislative body been divided in different branches? Because he says that next, okay? We're going to divide that legislature into different branches and render them by different modes of election and different principles of action as little connected with each other as the nature of their common functions and their common dependence on the society will admit. It may be necessary to guard against dangerous encroachments by still further precautions. We might have to do more later, but already we've divided that legislative branch up some more. How have we divided that legislative body? Say it again. We got the House of Representatives and we got the Senate. Now, he says we've done a couple of things here, okay? He says, as little connected with each other in the nature of their common functions and common dependence of society. Where is it? Sorry, here. Different modes of election. Now, today, they're both done by direct election. We changed that in 1913 during the Progressive era. But back then, members of the House were elected by direct election. Does anybody remember how senators were picked? They were picked by state legislators, and we had that in place for over 100 years, and then now for over 100 years we've done it differently. But he also said in different principles of action. Do the two houses have all the same jobs? They have some of the same jobs, right? They both make laws. But can you give me an example of something only the Senate does? Like we talked about it last week. Votes on the Supreme Court, just votes on actually all presidential appointments. Okay? So only the Senate, another example, ratifies or approves treaties. And if you remember studying World War I last year, the Senate rejected the Versailles Treaty that President Wilson had negotiated. That was their right to do that. The House has some different jobs. For example, only the House can file articles of impeachment or formal charges against a high-ranking official. But then in the impeachment process, it is the Senate that then hears and decides whether that person is guilty of those high crimes and misdemeanors. When it comes to proposing laws, there's one specific type of law that only the House can propose, and that is a revenue bill. Okay, remember, bill's a proposed law. All right. By the way, Bill, he's in the back, right behind Haley. You know, so in the little cup there, and is okay. So remember, I'm just a Bill. He's there. So if you're ever having a bad day and you're like, Mr. Pereira, man, that guy's in a mood today. Okay. You just remember that no matter how bad your day is going, back there is Bill, and he is smiling at you, and he's happy, and he's cheering you on, and okay, he's there for you. All right. Well, you don't like you mocking my art? Come on. Okay. All right. And you know, the presidents are smiling. Some of them are smiling. Some of them are really serious looking. There's always somebody smiling at you. Okay. All right. Now, do you see how the Federalist Papers are sort of like a commentary on the Constitution? And what I mean by commentary, he's explaining it. Okay, we've set up this government, and we are just now we're just kind of explaining it away. Let's at least do one more. We're looking for this. Why is separation of powers the Federalist answer to anti-Federalist charges of a too large abuse of government? Because that's been the whole fear he's trying to address. He's trying to persuade them. He says, first, in a single republic, all the power surrendered by the people is submitted to the administration of a single government, and the usurpations, the taking away of power, are guarded against by a division of government into distinct and separate departments. In the compound Republic of America, the power surrendered by the people is first divided between two distinct governments, and that's, by the way, what two distinct governments are we talking about? Like we live here in Canandaigua, there's at least two distinct governments over us. There's actually more, but there's two. There's the federal government. We have to follow federal laws, right? But we also have to we have to also follow what other laws? State laws. That's what he's talking about. He's hinting at federalism here. Okay? Another kind of big principle of our government. And then the portion allotted to each subdivided amongst distinct and separate departments. Then we do 3 branches, and one of those branches we divide in 2. And then at the state level, we have 3 branches. Do you see how we're really spreading the power out? The different governments will control each other, and at the same time, that each will be controlled by itself. So they're independent of each other, yet they keep each other in check. Do you see what he's signaling there? Are you picking up what Madison's laying down? Are you catching what Madison's throwing? Are you buying what Madison's selling? You're like, no, because he's dead. No, come on, guys, help me out here. Are we seeing our government reflected in Federalist 51? So when you look at these documents, okay, like, you know, you had some videos on Federalist 10 and Brutus 1. It's worth going into the foundational documents and looking at them, and you have a whole packet of them. I gave you a hard copy on day 1. But I wanted to just look at specific parts and look at how we read these. You're going to have to be good analytical readers. And sometimes it is about what's reflected. Now, we don't have time to look at minority rights, but it'd be worth your time, there's not really an assignment, to take a few minutes tomorrow, okay? Because I know you all get up at 6 a.m. on Wednesdays. How many of you at least get a later start time? Because you don't have to commute here, right? How many of you have a later start time? How many of you have a set later start time or a set time, whatever? Okay. 7:30 you get up. You're like, my teacher's at school, but I'm not. Okay. All right. Good. I'm glad you guys had that. I think no judgment. If you're getting the work done, no judgment. Okay. I recommend getting ready, having your breakfast, showering. Okay. I had a bad habit in the spring of like being in my jammies. So, okay. Questions? Peace.